Have you ever felt that strange ache in your chest when you close a social media app? A hollowness that wasn't there before you opened it? As if something vital was stolen from your soul in those scrolling minutes? I met a woman last autumn who sat by a riverbank, her phone beside her on the grass, screen down, deliberately turned away as if it were a sleeping serpent she dared not wake. When I asked her why she came to this quiet place, she looked at me with eyes that carried the weight of 1,000 unanswered notifications and said something I will never forget. She said that every time she posted a picture of her life, she felt her actual life slipping further away, as if she were trading her existence for a shadow of existence, her presence for a digital ghost that everyone could see but no one could truly touch. She told me she had begun to feel like a curator of moments rather than a liver of them, arranging her experiences like flowers in a vase, beautiful to behold but severed from their roots, dying slowly in the artificial light of screens. This woman, whose name I never learned, had discovered what Walt Whitman understood over a century before the first pixel ever glowed on a screen. She had stumbled upon the most profound spiritual truth about our modern condition, the truth that those who flee from social media are not running away from connection, but running toward a deeper connection that the digital world cannot contain, cannot commodify, cannot reduce to likes and shares and fleeting dopamine sparks. Today, I want to share with you Whitman's most revolutionary insight about the spiritual psychology of withdrawal, about those souls who sense that something sacred is being lost in our endless performance of self, and how this ancient wisdom can transform your understanding of presence, authenticity, and what it truly means to be alive in a world that increasingly mistakes simulation for reality. The secret Whitman discovered about disconnection is not in the act of leaving but in what the leaving reveals, the hunger of a soul that has been fed illusions and now craves the substance of genuine experience, the touch of wind on skin, the unfiltered moment of existence without an audience, without a caption, without the need to translate every feeling into content. Whitman wrote of the body electric, but he also wrote of the quiet spaces between words, the pauses where the soul breathes, the moments when we are alone with the grass and the stars, and discover we are never truly alone because we are part of everything, woven into the fabric of existence in ways that no algorithm can calculate, no feed can capture, no platform can replicate. Those who flee from social media are experiencing what Whitman called the great realization, the awakening to the fact that the soul requires solitude not as an escape, but as a return, a coming home to the self that existed before it was fractured into profiles and personas, before it learned to perform its existence rather than simply exist. In a forest clearing one morning, I watched a young man delete his social media accounts one by one, and with each deletion, I saw something extraordinary happen. His shoulders dropped, his breath deepened, his eyes seemed to focus on the distance rather than the perpetual near point of a screen. He told me he had spent 5 years crafting an image of himself that bore less and less resemblance to who he actually was, that he had become a character in a story he no longer wanted to tell, and that the exhaustion of maintaining this digital self had become unbearable. This is the spiritual crisis of our age, Whitman would say, the crisis of a soul divided against itself, performing for an invisible audience that is itself performing. Everyone watching everyone, no one truly seeing. The spiritual psychology of those who flee is rooted in a profound recognition that attention is not just a commodity to be harvested, but the very substance of consciousness, the sacred currency of presence. And when we give our attention freely to the endless scroll, we are giving away the only tool we have for actually experiencing our lives. Whitman understood that every moment we are not present to ourselves, we are lost, wandering in a maze of other people's projected reality, comparing our inner experience to everyone else's curated exterior, mistaking their highlights for their whole lives, their masks for their faces, their performances for their truths. The people who flee from social media often describe a feeling of reclaiming their own minds, as if thoughts that were once interrupted every few minutes by notifications can finally complete themselves, as if ideas that needed silence and space to develop can finally bloom in the garden of an undistracted consciousness. But let me ask you something, just between us, something I have been reflecting on deeply since I first encountered Whitman's poetry about the self and the soul. When was the last time you sat with yourself, truly sat with yourself, without the impulse to document it, without the reflex to reach for your phone, without the underlying anxiety that if you are not broadcasting your existence, you somehow exist less. I know that perhaps you have never shared this feeling with anyone, because who could understand something so strange, so counter to what our culture tells us about connection and relevance and staying visible? But here, in this moment, you are understood. Your discomfort with the constant performance, your exhaustion from the endless comparison, your sense that something essential is being lost, all of this is not weakness or failure or an inability to keep up with the modern world. It is your soul crying out for what Whitman called the original energy, the unmediated experience of being alive. Take a deep breath right now and allow yourself to feel, not think, but feel, what emerges when you imagine a day, a week, a month without the weight of social media. What rises in you? Fear? Relief? Longing? Your answer to this question matters more than you might realize. If you feel called to share your experience with social media and what you have discovered about your own relationship to digital presence, the comments below are a sacred space for your truth. Complete this sentence if something in you stirs to speak. My experience with social media taught me that, and know that your honest reflection might be exactly what another soul needs to hear today, to know they are not alone in this struggle between the authentic and the performed self. If you prefer to reflect in silence, that too is a profound honoring of your journey. There are different ways that people experience the flight from social media. Different spiritual types who recognize the need to withdraw for different reasons. Some flee because they feel their creativity being drained, turned into content rather than allowed to exist for its own sake. And these are the artists of present, the ones Whitman would recognize as poets of lived experience, who understand that not everything beautiful needs to be captured, that some moments are too sacred to be shared, that the act of reaching for a camera can shatter the very magic one is trying to preserve. Others withdraw because they recognize that their capacity for genuine intimacy is being eroded, that they have hundreds of online friends but feel more alone than ever. And these are the seekers of authentic connection, the ones who remember what it feels like to look into someone's eyes without the distraction of a glowing rectangle, to have a conversation that meanders and deepens rather than one interrupted by the constant checking of notifications, to build relationships based on present rather than performance. Then there are those who flee because they feel their sense of self becoming unstable, shaped too much by external validation, rising and falling with likes and comments. And these are the protectors of inner authority, the ones who are reclaiming the right to know themselves from the inside out rather than the outside in, who understand that a self built on the shifting sands of public opinion is no self at all but a mirror reflecting everyone's projection. Some leave because they notice their attention span shrinking, their thoughts becoming more fragmented, their ability to read deeply or think complexly diminishing. And these are the guardians of consciousness, the ones who recognize that the quality of mind matters, that the endless scroll is training the brain to skim rather than dive, to react rather than reflect, to consume rather than create. And there are those who withdraw because they sense something darker, a manipulation of their emotions, a harvesting of their psychological vulnerabilities, an architecture designed not to serve their well-being, but to maximize their engagement regardless of the cost to their mental health. And these are the awakened ones, the ones Whitman would call the resistors, who refuse to be reduced to data points, who insist on their full humanity in a system that profits from keeping them anxious, comparing, scrolling endlessly in search of a satisfaction that the platform is specifically designed never to provide. The challenges faced by those who flee are not small or simple. First comes the fear of missing out, the anxiety that by stepping away from the constant stream of information and social updates, you will somehow be left behind, excluded, forgotten. And Whitman would remind you that this fear is the voice of a culture that has confused visibility with value, that has made you believe your worth is determined by how many people are watching you, rather than by the depth and authenticity of how you are living. Then there is the addiction itself, the neurological grooves carved by years of checking, scrolling, posting, the dopamine loops that make reaching for the phone as automatic as breathing. And breaking this habit requires not just willpower, but a complete reimagining of how you structure your time, your boredom, your need for stimulation. Many who attempt to leave find themselves returning within days, sometimes within hours, pulled back by the magnetic force of FOMO, by the feeling that they are cut off from the world, by the sheer discomfort of being alone with their thoughts after years of constant distraction. There is also the social pressure, the incomprehension of friends and family who see your withdrawal as rejection or judgment, who cannot understand why you would voluntarily step away from what they consider normal and necessary, who worry that you are isolating yourself or missing opportunity. The person fleeing social media must learn to hold their ground, to trust their inner knowing even when the outer world questions it, to remember that every spiritual awakening looks like madness to those still dreaming the cultural dream. Another obstacle is the practical integration of social media into modern life, the way it has become entwined with work, with maintaining relationships across distances, with staying informed about events and causes that matter. And the challenge becomes not a simple binary of all or nothing, but a much more nuanced negotiation of how to use these tools consciously, rather than being used by them, how to maintain agency in spaces designed to undermine it. And perhaps the deepest challenge is facing what social media was helping you avoid, the feelings of loneliness or inadequacy or purposelessness that the constant distraction was covering up. And when you remove the anesthetic of endless scrolling, you must finally feel the pain underneath, must finally address the real questions about meaning and connection and self-worth that no amount of likes or followers can answer. The transformation that occurs when someone successfully navigates their withdrawal from social media is nothing short of a spiritual rebirth, a metamorphosis that Whitman would recognize as the soul shedding layers of accumulated artifice to reveal its original radiance. It begins with the return of time, not just more hours in the day, but a different quality of time, time that stretches and deepens, time in which you can lose yourself in a book or a conversation or a walk, without the nagging awareness of what you might be missing online. This reclaimed time feels somehow more substantial, more textured, as if you have been living in fast forward and have finally discovered the pause button, allowing yourself to actually experience each moment rather than rushing through it to get to the next notification, the next update, the next hit of digital stimulation. People who undergo this transformation often describe a sensation of coming out of a fog they didn't even know they were in, suddenly seeing colors more vividly, hearing sounds more clearly, feeling emotions more deeply. It is as if social media had been functioning as a kind of spiritual anesthetic, numbing not just pain but joy, not just anxiety but wonder, flattening the entire range of human experience into the narrow bandwidth of what can be captured in a post or a story. Whitman spoke of loafing at ease, observing a spear of summer grass, and this kind of observation, patient, absorbing, completely present, becomes possible again when the mind is not constantly being pulled back to the screen, when attention is no longer fragmented into 1,000 pieces, but gathers itself into a focused beam of awareness that can illuminate whatever it rests upon. The person begins to notice the world with fresh eyes, the play of light on water that shifts and dances in patterns no camera could adequately capture, the expressions on people's faces that reveal so much more than their carefully composed profile pictures ever could, the texture of food that becomes interesting again when you are not photographing it before eating it, the quality of silence that is not empty but full, pregnant with possibility and peace. All the small miracles that were always there but hidden behind the veil of digital preoccupation suddenly reveal themselves, and the person feels like a child again, encountering the world for the first time, amazed by the ordinary, astonished by the everyday, grateful for the simple fact of being conscious in a universe that somehow brought forth consciousness from unconscious matter. There is a reclamation of mental space, thoughts that can develop without interruption, following their own meandering paths to unexpected conclusions, daydreams that can unfold naturally like flowers opening to the sun, creative ideas that emerge from boredom rather than being drowned out by constant stimulation, bubbling up from the deep wells of the unconscious mind that can only be accessed when the surface is still, rather than churned into perpetual froth by the endless incoming stream of other people's thoughts and images and opinions. This return of the mind to itself is experienced as a kind of homecoming, a remembering of what it feels like to be the author of your own attention, rather than having it hijacked every few minutes, to follow a train of thought all the way to its destination rather than jumping off at every station because another train is passing by. The individual begins to think their own thoughts again, not just recombining and reacting to what they have seen on their feed, and discovers that their mind, when given space and silence, is far more interesting, more creative, more capable of insight than they had begun to believe. Relationships deepen because the person is finally fully present, listening not with half an ear while checking their phone, but with complete attention, making eye contact that lasts longer than a glance, responding not with reflexive reactions but with considered thoughts, asking follow-up questions because they are genuinely curious rather than waiting for their turn to talk. Others respond to this presence with their own, sensing that they are being truly seen and heard, perhaps for the first time in a long while, and the conversation shifts from the superficial exchange of information to something richer and more nourishing, a genuine meeting of two consciousnesses, a communion in the deepest sense of that word. This creates a resonance that no digital interaction can match, because it is happening in real time, in real space, with all the nonverbal communication of body language and tone and energy that gets lost in translation when mediated through screens and text. The person discovers that they have been starving for this kind of connection while filling themselves with the empty calories of online interaction. And now that they are tasting real nourishment, they wonder how they ever mistook the substitute for the real thing. The individual discovers or rediscovers activities that bring genuine satisfaction rather than the hollow pleasure of scrolling, pursuits that engage the hands and body, that produce something tangible, that connect them to the physical world and to other people in unmediated ways. They might take up gardening and feel the earth under their fingernails, planting seeds and tending growth, participating in the ancient partnership between human effort and natural process. They might return to cooking, not as performance art to be photographed but as an act of care and creation, measuring and mixing and tasting, engaging all the senses, producing nourishment for themselves and others. They might pick up a musical instrument and struggle through the awkward early stages without posting about it, finding satisfaction in the incremental progress that no one but themselves witnesses. They might write in a journal that will never be published, paint pictures that will never be displayed, build things that will never be admired by anyone but the builder, and discover that the doing itself, not the recognition of the doing, is where the joy actually lives. There is often a surprising increase in productivity, not the false productivity of constant busyness and multitasking, of answering emails while in meetings while also checking social media, but real, focused, deep work that comes from being able to sustain attention for longer than a few minutes, to enter what psychologists call flow state, that condition of complete absorption where time disappears and the work itself becomes its own reward. The person finds they can read books again, not skimming but actually reading, following complex arguments, remembering what they read, thinking about it afterward. They can tackle projects that require sustained concentration, building something intricate over days or weeks, rather than looking for quick hits of accomplishment. They discover that the depth of their engagement with any task is directly related to the quality of the attention they bring to it, and that attention, like a muscle, grows stronger with use and atrophies with neglect, and that their years of social media use had been slowly weakening this crucial capacity. And gradually, subtly, the person notices their sense of self becoming more stable, less dependent on external validation, no longer rising and falling with the metrics of likes and shares and comments, rooted instead in their actual experience and value rather than in the reflected opinions of hundreds of people they barely know. They develop what Whitman would call inner authority, the ability to know what they think and feel without needing constant external confirmation, to trust their own perceptions and judgment, to distinguish between what they genuinely want and what they think they should want, based on what everyone else seems to want. This stability feels like solid ground after years of trying to build a self on shifting sand. And from this ground, they can grow in directions that are truly their own, rather than contorting themselves to fit the shapes that get the most approval. They become less reactive, less defensive, less anxious about how they are perceived, because their sense of worth is no longer outsourced to the collective judgment of the crowd but held within themselves, nurtured by the quality of their actual lived experience rather than by the curated image of that experience. This transformation is not without its periods of discomfort and doubt, but those who persist through the initial withdrawal symptoms describe a quality of life that is richer, more textured, more real than what they knew before. Whitman's wisdom applied to our digital age offers practical guidance for those navigating this journey. First, understand that presence is a practice, not a destination, and like any practice, it requires repetition and patience. Begin by creating small islands of unplugged time in your day, periods when your phone is not just ignored but actually put away, out of sight, out of reach, allowing yourself to fully inhabit whatever you are doing without the possibility of interruption. Second, reconnect with your body, because the body is always in the present moment and cannot be fooled by digital illusions. Walk, dance, swim, garden, cook, engage in any activity that requires you to feel your physical presence in space and time. Whitman celebrated the body as much as the soul, and in our era of disembodied digital existence, this celebration is more necessary than ever. Third, cultivate real-world relationships with the same attention and care you once gave to your online presence. Invest in face-to-face interactions, long, unhurried conversations, shared experiences that create memories rather than content. Fourth, practice boredom, that much maligned state that is actually the fertile ground from which creativity and self-knowledge emerge. When you feel the impulse to reach for your phone, pause, breathe, allow the discomfort of having nothing to do, and notice what arises when you stop filling every empty moment with stimulation. Fifth, curate your inputs consciously, choosing quality over quantity, depth over breadth, seeking out long-form reading, contemplative music, art that challenges rather than merely entertains, remembering that what you consume shapes your consciousness, and that you have the right and responsibility to choose what shapes you. Sixth, keep a journal, not for posting online but for your eyes alone, a practice of self-reflection that helps you understand your own thoughts and feelings without the distorting lens of an audience. And finally, trust your direct experience over all the voices telling you what you should want, should do, should be, remembering that the authority of your own lived reality is more valuable than any amount of likes or follows or external validation. The common traps that ensnare those attempting to flee social media must be clearly understood if they are to be avoided. The first trap is replacement addiction, simply substituting one form of digital distraction for another, trading social media for endless news consumption or video streaming or online shopping, never addressing the underlying pattern of using screens to avoid presence. The second trap is spiritual bypassing, using the language of mindfulness and presence to avoid dealing with legitimate needs for connection and communication, turning withdrawal into isolation, and calling it enlightenment. Some people fall into the trap of superiority, looking down on those who still use social media, becoming preachy or judgmental, forgetting that everyone is on their own journey and that what works for one person may not work for another. Another trap is the all-or-nothing approach, believing that any use of social media is failure, rather than learning to develop a more nuanced relationship with these tools, using them consciously and sparingly when they genuinely serve your purposes. Some mistake the initial euphoria of unplugging for the destination itself, not realizing that the real work begins after the novelty wears off, when the deeper patterns of seeking external validation and avoiding discomfort begin to surface. Others attempt to flee without addressing the legitimate needs that social media was meeting, however imperfectly, such as the need for community or creative expression, or staying connected with loved ones, and without finding alternative ways to meet these needs, they inevitably get pulled back. And perhaps the most subtle trap is making the absence of social media into a new identity, a new way of feeling special or different, rather than simply a choice that allows you to live more fully, turning what should be a means to an end into an end in itself. The integration of body and soul, matter and spirit, that Whitman so beautifully articulated, becomes especially important in understanding the spiritual psychology of those who flee from social media. Whitman saw no separation between the physical and the spiritual, no hierarchy that placed soul above body or spirit above matter. He understood that we are not spirits trapped in bodies, but embodied beings whose spirituality expresses itself through flesh and blood, through touch and taste and the full sensory experience of being alive. Social media, by its very nature, is a disembodying force, reducing us to images and text, to carefully curated representations that leave out the smell of our skin, the weight of our presence, the particular way we move through space, the timbre of our voice, the warmth of our touch. When we spend hours each day in this disembodied state, projecting our consciousness into a digital realm while our bodies sit hunched over screens, breathing shallowly, disconnected from physical sensation, we create a split within ourselves that Whitman would recognize as deeply wounding. The flight from social media is often, at its core, a flight back into the body, a recognition that we have been living too much in our heads, in abstraction, in representation, and that we need to come home to the sensory, immediate, unfiltered experience of being a physical creature on a physical planet. This return to embodiment is not a rejection of the spiritual, but a fulfillment of it, because for Whitman, the divine is not somewhere else, not in some transcendent realm separate from matter, but here, now, in this breath, this heartbeat, this particular irreplaceable moment of existence. The person who flees social media and begins to spend more time outdoors, feeling the sun on their face and the earth beneath their feet, is not just getting exercise, but engaging in a spiritual practice of reconnection with the more than human world, remembering that they are part of a vast living web of existence that predates humanity and will outlast it. They are reclaiming what Whitman called cosmic consciousness, the awareness that they are not separate, isolated individuals performing for each other on screen, but expressions of the same universal energy that moves through stars and trees and oceans and all living things. This perspective doesn't diminish the human but expands it beyond the narrow confines of the ego and its endless need for validation. When you understand that the same atoms that form your body were once part of stars, that the water in your cells has been cycling through the earth for billions of years, that you are quite literally made of the same substance as everything else, then the question of how many followers you have, or how many likes your post got, becomes almost comically irrelevant. You are already connected to everything in the most profound way possible, woven into the fabric of reality itself, and no amount of digital connection can add to or subtract from this fundamental belonging. The message Whitman whispers to those who have the courage to step away from the performance of self and return to the direct experience of being is this: you are enough, right now, exactly as you are, without needing to prove or perform or perfect anything. Your existence is its own justification, your presence its own gift. You do not need to be seen by thousands to matter. You do not need to broadcast your life to validate your life. You are a singular expression of the universe experiencing itself. And that is enough. That is everything. That is the only fact that matters. The grass grows whether anyone photographs it or not. The stars shine whether anyone posts about them or not. The river flows whether anyone shares it or not. And you are alive, breathing, feeling, experiencing this impossible, precious, temporary existence. And that is the real miracle, not the simulation of the miracle that social media offered. Whitman invites you to loaf and invite your soul, to cease not a moment from being yourself, to resist much and obey little, to go freely with the powerful, uneducated persons of the earth. He invites you to discover that the greatest thing about digital technology is your power to turn it off, to reclaim your attention, to remember who you were before the world told you that you needed to be constantly visible to matter. The flight from social media is not a rejection of connection, but a search for truer connection, not an escape from the world but a return to the world as it actually is, rather than as it is represented. And in this return, you may discover what Whitman knew all along, that everything you need to be happy, to be fulfilled, to be spiritually awake, is already here, in the ordinary miracle of your breathing body, your thinking mind, your feeling heart, your connection to the vast mysterious whole of which you are an inseparable part. If these words about the spiritual psychology of fleeing social media have touched something in you, something that has been waiting to be acknowledged, I want to invite you, not as someone who has all the answers but as a fellow traveler on this journey, to join this community of seekers who are learning to live more presently, more authentically, more fully. By subscribing to this channel, you become part of a circle of souls who sense that there is more to life than what appears on our screens, who are reclaiming their attention as a sacred resource, who understand that true spirituality is not an escape from the body or the world, but a deeper engagement with both. You will find here weekly reflections inspired by Whitman's timeless wisdom about presence, authenticity, and the courage to be yourself in a world that profits from your self-doubt. You will discover that your longing for something more real than digital connection is not weird or wrong, but a sign of spiritual health, a signal from your soul that it is ready to live more fully. This community exists to remind you that you are not alone in feeling overwhelmed by the constant performance, exhausted by the comparison, hungry for genuine presence. Every video I create is an invitation to pause, to breathe, to remember what matters beyond metrics and algorithms. If you are someone who has been considering stepping away from social media, or who has already taken that step and is navigating the challenges and revelations it brings, or who simply wants to develop a more conscious relationship with digital technology, this channel is for you. Subscribe, and let us continue this exploration together of what Whitman called the simple, compact, well-joined scheme of existence, the beauty and sacredness of the everyday, the miracle of being alive in a body on this earth at this moment.